I stumbled across multiple comments on Instagram where men claim that women don't have hobbies. I'm a woman myself, 22 years old, and I'm genuinely surprised by that. All the women I know, former schoolmates or university friends, family members, etc., have hobbies, myself included. Playing an instrument, painting, knitting, reading, climbing, playing football, soccer, gardening, etc. It never even occurred to me that women not having hobbies was a stereotype. I know that men on Instagram who write comments are not representative and often self-proclaimed alphas. But is this stereotype well known? Do you agree with it? Story 1. On Tinder, there are plenty of women who, if you believe their bio, only like drinking wine, watching TV, and meeting with friends. That is by far not the majority of women, though. Story 2. 3 out of 5 of my exes didn't have any. The fourth did enough drugs to consider it a hobby. The last one was really passionate about everything she took interest in. Story 3. Because there are many who do not. From my personal experience, it's not exclusive to them. These days, there are many people in general who basically do nothing for themselves when work is over. The closest these men and women have to hobbies is mindless consumption of something. Drugs, clothes, media products, food, no matter. The consumption of something is the hobby to them. Story 4. Personally, my wife has no hobbies other than watching TV. For example, if she had a day off alone, I honestly don't know what she would do other than watch TV and get a 30-minute workout in. Story 5. I've met some boring people, but not all of them were women. In fact, the most hobby-driven woman in my life is my own mother. She cultivated that interest in me. She's into anything crafting. She's incredible. Sewing, felting, crochet, steampunk costume design, card making, gardening, reading, drawing, painting, etc., and I love her for it. Story 6. Particularly in Japan, people don't like putting anything even possibly weird in their bios, so it's quite normal to see eating and sleeping listed as a woman's only hobbies. Story 7. I think it is a thing that applies to the human race as a whole. I love reading, but I already study so much that I do not want to read after 4 hours of reading. Story 8. I have hobbies, but I don't like to talk about them because they are personal, and I'm always afraid people will criticize them or look at the stuff I do, and I'm not interested in sharing. Also, it's always fun to surprise people who think they know me and have me all figured out. I didn't know you could do that. Well, you don't know everything. Story 9. It's not just women, but more women than men who usually write inane things about themselves like, I enjoy having fun and listening to music. Yeah, you and 99.99% of the human race. It's a nice idiot filter though. Story 10. A lot of things women enjoy doing are not considered hobbies by some people. You'll often see videos of fun workouts being criticized as a waste of time and ineffective, suggesting they don't really count as workouts. Watching TV and talking about it is labeled as vapid and lazy. The top comment currently has replies arguing that travel and hiking can't be considered hobbies. I also think many people struggle to list their hobbies, but if you ask them what they like doing instead, they mention drawing, reading, knitting, and all the other activities you mentioned. Sometimes they might blank when directly asked the question, but once you're around them, you notice they engage in these activities. Story 11. How many men are doing this now? I know that men on Instagram who write comments are not representative. Very much so. I had thought that gender norms for men using Instagram were pretty much restricted to trying to slide into a girl's direct messages and following Instagram models for a man's favorite form of softcore pornography. Story 12. I didn't know this was a stereotype. I haven't seen it here. It's interesting to hear. Almost all of my partners or the women I have been interested in have some type of hobby. They usually have way more than I do. The only one I'd say that did not was narcissistic and one of the worst humans I've ever met in my entire life. Story 13. I think the issue is most people don't understand the definition of the word hobby. It's simply a leisure activity we do for pleasure. So eating out or shopping is a hobby. I personally prefer cooking my own food and despise shopping, but that doesn't mean that those aren't hobbies for people that enjoy those activities. Story 14. I usually hear this in a very specific context. Often when men are struggling to meet women, they'll be inundated with horrible and usually unsolicited advice. Stay off the apps. Don't go to clubs or bars because those women are trash. Don't approach women in public, etc. At some point, this will culminate in someone telling them, just find some hobbies that you love, and you'll eventually meet someone who also loves them. So they follow this misguided advice, join a bunch of groups that align with their passions, and discover that the only people there are a bunch of other men who are in the same situation he is. Group after group and hobby after hobby, nothing but men. But he keeps getting the same poor advice. I don't think anyone believes that women literally have no hobbies, that they're all just sitting and staring mindlessly at the wall when they're not working or sleeping. In context, it usually means that very few women have social hobbies, at least in the sense that those hobbies extend beyond their immediate friend group. Story 15. I believe I may have an insight into this as a woman who has a wide range of hobbies, some of which are male-dominated and some of which are female-dominated. I have found it interesting how more of the male-dominated hobbies I am into are often seen as more legitimate, for example, whiskey tastings, modern board gaming, and watching football. Meanwhile, the hobbies I am into with more women than men are the ones where I often hear, "Oh, that's not a hobby though, that's just something you do," such as reading and being a part of a book club, pole fitness or reformer Pilates classes, exploring new cafes or restaurants, visiting museums, or taking group painting classes. Story 16. I have more hobbies than I know what to do with. My basement is full of the skeletons of hobbies from years gone by. I could make you 300 perfect soy candles in any scent or color you like, and the longest part of the process would be finding where I put the candle supplies. Story 17. Think about how we interact with friends. Men often need a common activity to engage in when with friends, but women often socialize with friends by just talking. It probably goes back to our hunter-gatherer gender roles. We are social creatures, so if the way we socialize is different, then maybe hobbies are affected by that too. Story 18. Of the 5 long-term relationships I have had, only one had a hobby: crocheting, knitting, houseplants, and cooking. The other 4 did not have any passions outside work and scrolling social media. Story 19. This obsession with hobbies by young people is getting ridiculous. I don't know if it is looking for something to fill a hole in their hearts or what, but hobbies are a secondary or tertiary concern, and people are elevating them to the level of things like integrity, perseverance, shared principles, financial goals, family goals, health and fitness ambition, and lifestyle goals. Yes, it is important that you like doing some things together, but the reality is that this changes over time, and many people don't know what they like yet. When I was 25, I thought I liked bars, sports, partying, historical fiction, fantasy fiction, video games, and I thought I disliked the outdoors. I didn't go to the gym much at all. At 45, bars are dumb. Sports are only interesting on occasion. I haven't drunk in 8 years. I hike, bike, play guitar, write music, and still play games occasionally. I do like historical fiction, but am tired of most fantasy. My wife and I found biking together, and we hike all the time. My wife and I have been to the gym hundreds of times together, and we also go independently. We have a list of things we want to try over the next 2 years to see if we like that too. If I was 25 and making one of these hobbies and interests checklists, I would have thought my wife a poor match. We don't know what we don't know, people. Let this elevation of hobbies fade into the background where it belongs. Your hobby is not your God. And if a young person likes to drink and travel, well, drinking and traveling is really fun, especially in your 20s. It does not mean there is no depth of character. Story 20. I have met a lot of women who just endlessly scroll TikTok and Instagram, and their hobbies, from what they told me, were either traveling, eating out, or going on adventures. Traveling and eating out are not hobbies. Are you really going on adventures every weekend? Okay. Story 21. People have already mentioned that it depends on what people consider legitimate hobbies. I'd also add, though, that on average, women spend more time doing housework and chores than men, which takes up both time and energy and leaves less time for hobbies. Story 22. My wife not only caught a few of my hobbies, but taught me a few of hers. However, when we do barbecues or something for her work friends, it turns out there's very little to talk to them about aside from work stuff or why they're single. You'd assume those with hobbies are interesting enough not to have to list their hobbies on some dating sites, which in turn might warp overall perception. Story 23. It's not exclusive to women. Men are like this too. Their only hobby is consuming products and media. Seriously, some of the most boring people I've ever met. Story 24. At least from my generation and my observations, they often don't share what they do as a hobby, even when asked in a conversation. Then there are those who share excessively but don't engage in that hobby at all. Things like, dancing is my life, which results in attending a ball once a year and doing nothing else in that regard. Typically social media nonsense, if you will. Those two extremes tend to blur out the rest. Story 25. Because they do not consider women's hobbies as legitimate hobbies. A woman saying makeup is her hobby would be disregarded as shallow, even though it takes real talent to transform your face. A man playing video games would be considered a legitimate hobby, and if he finds a woman who also plays video games, then she is awesome because she has interesting hobbies. Another example is a man is allowed to be really into sports and support a sports team as a hobby, but if a woman really likes Taylor Swift and goes to a lot of her concerts, buys all her albums, and knows everything about her, then she is just basic. Story 26. Hobbies that men deem to be a hobby. Also, many women will not consider many of their activities as hobbies because of this point. Some will say they have no hobbies and then casually mention doing multi-hour walks in the hills every other weekend. That is a hobby. If doing multi-hour makeup, looking at tutorials to learn a new trend, and changing it up or just using the same one they have done for 2 years but reducing the time from 2 hours to 1 hour, that is a hobby. Story 27. I've met many people, both men and women, who do not have hobbies. I would say it's probably equal across the board in general. I also think there can be a difference of opinion on what we consider hobbies. One of my hobbies is makeup. I enjoy it, I like learning about it, and it makes me feel good. I don't wear makeup every day, but I consider it a hobby. I enjoy cooking, the process, learning new dishes, changing up recipes, and plating my food to make it look pretty and take pictures of it. Gardening is another hobby. I am out there every day, and this year I expanded my garden. I do many different crafty things, including sewing. I enjoy hiking. My hikes might not be intense, but it is something I actively pursue because I enjoy it. I've met men whose hobbies are beer tasting or video games, and that's it. If it's something you actively pursue for enjoyment, it can be classified as a hobby. I think some men and women consider different things as hobbies. Different people classify different things as hobbies. I've met some really boring men, many men who do not have hobbies. And I've met the same for women. I've never heard that women, in general, don't have hobbies. Story 28. Dating sites show you women like that because they specifically are the type of women who don't meet men in real life simply because they don't have hobbies. Creates a skewed vision. A friend of mine coined it the girl sickness. Story 29. I think men and women define hobbies differently. The Oxford definition is an activity done regularly in one's leisure time for pleasure. I think a lot of men think hobbies must be an active skill or sport. Women get pleasure from socializing and resting in their leisure time. Story 30. It's like if they don't find it fun, think it is too feminine, or you don't want to monetize it, it doesn't matter. Early in our relationship, I once had my boyfriend tell me their brother's girlfriend, who works in youth care, has no hobbies and doesn't do anything in her spare time except do her makeup, spend time with her friends, and do strength training at the gym, as she is competing in a competition. I said those are actually hobbies, to which he disagreed. His brother also trains and competes, and that's basically all he does, but he has never accused him of having no hobbies. He also then asked me what I like to do, so I told him cooking, foraging, gardening, reading, and learning about political history. His unironic response was, "We'll find something for you, baby." Story 31. Because when we start dating them, we become their hobby. Also, it's very likely all the women you know have hobbies because you are a woman with hobbies. It's an echo chamber. Most of the young men I know make a lot of money. I'm in technology and software, that's why. It's a bubble. The vast majority of men of any age never make that in their lifetime. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That's why when men who likely date and interact with more women outside of your bubble say that it comes as a surprise. Story 32. Only one of the 3 girls I've seriously dated has had a hobby that she actually pursued. The others just work, then scroll Instagram Reels while watching Netflix. Rinse and repeat. Story 33. I feel like a lot of women prefer to relax in their downtime, which is absolutely nothing wrong. I think a lot of guys have this fairy tale in their heads that a gorgeous girl who is into all the same things as them is just going to stumble into their life. If you're really into something, then try and show it to your partner, but don't be too disappointed if they aren't immediately as excited about it as you are. Story 34. It's fascinating to see the imbalance in what is considered a hobby between men and women, or at least what is presented as such on social media and dating profiles. But I would argue there is a cultural angle to it. Women are often socialized to value communal activities like socializing over individualistic hobbies. Not to mention, some women find it safer to list more generic activities to avoid unwanted attention. Story 35. It's a generalization, of course, and generalizations are frustrating. However, I would say it's not entirely without basis. The last girl I had a crush on, as wonderful as she was, one flaw I noticed was that she didn't have any particular hobbies or passions. I also remember a female Twitter acquaintance who once tweeted that she felt bad for not having any specific interests or personality. I've seen similar tweets many times after that. I also notice many girls getting into a subject solely because their boyfriend is interested in it. Otherwise, they might not have explored it on their own. That is a turnoff that I'm becoming increasingly cautious of. You certainly have men who are somewhat shallow too, but if I'm being brutally honest, it's something I see more often in women. However, there are absolutely girls with strong personalities and specific hobbies.